On October 6, 2020, the world lost a guitar icon. Eddie Van Halen died at 65 after a long battle with cancer. But the story didn't end there. In the quiet aftermath, all eyes turned to one person, Valerie Bertinelli. She wasn't just his ex-wife. She had lived through the chaos, the addiction, the fame, and the heartbreak. She was there in his final moments, standing beside his family as one of rock's greatest legends slipped away. And when she finally broke her silence, her words hinted at a side of Eddie few truly understood. What did Valerie reveal? And what does it change about the way we see the man behind the music? Let's delve in. Eddie Van Halen grew up with an alcoholic father. Eddie Van Halen was barely a teenager when alcohol became part of his life. In fact, he later admitted he started drinking and smoking at just 12 years old. He would sometimes show up to high school already drunk. One day, his 9th grade science teacher could smell it on him and pulled him aside. But instead of scolding him, the teacher gave unexpected advice. Don't drink anything you can't see through. Eddie quickly understood what that meant. So vodka? He asked. The teacher nodded. And just like that, vodka became his drink of choice. At home, there wasn't much pushback either. Eddie often said he didn't blame his father, but acknowledged that alcoholism was normal in their household. His dad struggled with it too, and drinking never seemed to interfere with his work, at least not in a visible way. Eddie would later reflect that it didn't seem to affect his own work either, which made it even easier to justify. But the roots of it ran deeper than habit. He was painfully shy as a kid, especially when it came to performing. Before stepping on stage, the nerves would overwhelm him. When he asked his father how to cope with the fear, his dad handed him a cigarette and a drink. The effect was immediate. The anxiety softened. The edge disappeared. This works, Eddie realized. And for a long time it did, or at least it seemed to. Addiction controlled Eddie Van Halen's life for decades. After Van Halen released their explosive debut album in 1978, the band went through more lineup changes than most groups survive. David Lee Roth, Sammy Hagar, even Gary Cherone came and went. But through every shift, one thing stayed the same: Eddie Van Halen's dependence on alcohol and drugs. Years later, he spoke about it with surprising honesty. I was an alcoholic, and I needed alcohol to function, he admitted. For Eddie, it wasn't about backstage parties or the typical rock and roll chaos. While the rest of the band celebrated after shows, he usually went back to his hotel room alone. That's where the drinking and cocaine happened, not for fun, but, in his mind, for creativity. He believed the substances helped him work. Cocaine kept him awake. Alcohol lowered his inhibitions. In that altered state, he felt freer to experiment, to try riffs and ideas he might have second-guessed otherwise. He would sit by himself with the tape recorder running, playing for hours until his mind drifted somewhere beyond conscious thought. Some of his most daring musical moments were born in that haze, but what once felt like a tool eventually turned on him. By 2004, he admitted he had become a very angry drunk. The creativity came at a cost. 4 years later, in 2008, he finally made the decision to get sober. Eddie Van Halen lost a third of his tongue to cancer. Alongside the drinking and cocaine, Eddie Van Halen was also a lifelong smoker, a habit that would lead to one of the most serious battles of his life. When Esquire profiled him in 2012, the journalist described him as looking incredibly fit for 57, lean, energetic, even glowing with health. But behind that strong exterior was a quiet, devastating fight with tongue cancer. It started around 2000, when Eddie noticed what felt like a small callus on his tongue. At first, he brushed it off. Eventually, doctors told him it was cancer. Treatment was aggressive. He underwent an experimental radioactive rinse, and surgeons removed part of his tongue, a section reportedly about a third of it, shaped roughly like the tip of one of his guitar picks. The surgery forced him to quit smoking, but breaking the addiction wasn't simple. Even after losing part of his tongue, he struggled to let go completely, turning instead to vaping. Did music make Eddie Van Halen sick? Eddie Van Halen sometimes wondered whether the very thing he loved most, music, had somehow contributed to his illness. After his tongue cancer diagnosis, he didn't immediately point the finger at decades of heavy smoking. Instead, he offered a different theory in an interview with Billboard. He explained that he used metal guitar picks made of brass and copper and often held them in his mouth, in the exact spot where the cancer later developed. He also speculated about spending most of his life inside recording studios surrounded by electronic equipment and electromagnetic energy. Rather than reacting defensively, Arness surprised Stone by calmly agreeing with him. That response disarmed the tension entirely. From that point on, Stone's hostility faded, replaced by respect and even affection. He later described Arness not as an adversary, but as a great, big, wonderful cub bear. Stone went on to become one of the strongest defenders of Gunsmoke's core identity. He believed deeply in the show's characters and resisted any changes that drifted too far from its emotional center. His commitment helped preserve the soul of Gunsmoke, even when it caused friction behind the scenes. The dedication behind Gunsmoke's legends. A turning point in Gunsmoke came quietly, through a simple fan letter. It deeply affected Milburn Stone, pushing him to refine his portrayal of Doc Adams with greater warmth and humanity. That choice not only strengthened his bond with viewers, but also showed how seriously he took both his craft and the audience. Stone's insistence on professionalism, on set and in storytelling, helped give Gunsmoke the authenticity that made it an American classic. Before revealing that doctors removed cancer cells from his throat in the spring, only to discover that it had reappeared in his tongue again that fall, requiring yet another surgery. His health challenges didn't stop there. In 2012, he was rushed to the hospital for emergency surgery due to a severe case of diverticulitis. The condition occurs when small pouches that form in the digestive tract become inflamed or infected, often causing intense abdominal pain, fever, nausea, and significant digestive issues. At the time, the band reassured fans that no additional surgeries would be necessary and that he was expected to make a full recovery within a few months. But behind the scenes, it was clear that Eddie's body had been through far more than most people realized. Was Eddie Van Halen secretly suffering for years? After his 2012 health scare, Eddie Van Halen rarely spoke publicly about his condition. To many fans, his silence suggested he might finally be in the clear. But reports later revealed a far more difficult reality. In October 2019, TMZ reported that Eddie had been quietly traveling back and forth to Germany for years to receive specialized treatment for throat cancer. Since his initial diagnosis in 2000, he had undergone multiple procedures to remove cancerous cells, and for 5 years he had reportedly been receiving radiation treatments overseas, all without drawing attention to it. On paper, Stone and James Arness seemed mismatched. Stone was disciplined and intense. Arness was relaxed and understated. Yet instead of clashing fatally, their differences balanced the show. Stone's gravitas grounded the series, while Arness's dry humor softened it. Together, they created a rhythm that carried Gunsmoke through 2 decades. Their commitment was extraordinary. Arness appeared in nearly every episode of the series, while Stone missed only 6, his absence caused by a heart attack that nearly ended his career. His return resonated with audiences and underscored the physical and emotional toll the show demanded. Arness, meanwhile, battled severe arthritis in later years. To accommodate his health, producers condensed all his scenes into a single filming day per episode, giving him time to recover while allowing the show to continue uninterrupted. The wider Gunsmoke family shared that same dedication. Glenn Strange, who appeared on the series in the 1960s, brought decades of Hollywood experience with him. Long before Gunsmoke, he had famously taken over the role of Frankenstein from Boris Karloff in several films. Strange's death in 1973 marked another quiet loss for the show, but his presence added depth during a crucial era. Miss Kitty, Missed Chances, and the surprising turns of Gunsmoke. When Gunsmoke introduced audiences to Miss Kitty Russell, few could imagine anyone other than Amanda Blake in the role. Yet she wasn't the producer's first choice. That honor initially went to Polly Bond, a seasoned Western performer with deep roots in show business. Surprisingly, Bond turned the role down, a decision that quietly reshaped television history. That unexpected opening allowed Amanda Blake to step in, and she made Miss Kitty her own. Blake brought warmth, strength, and quiet complexity to the character, turning Kitty into one of television's most beloved women and a cornerstone of the show's success. Over time, her performance became inseparable from Gunsmoke itself. Get crowned Guitar World's greatest guitarist of all time just by playing well. Eddie Van Halen didn't simply master the electric guitar. He rewrote the rules for it. His style reshaped hard rock and inspired generations of players who tried, and often failed, to copy what he made look effortless. One of his most revolutionary techniques was two-handed finger tapping. Instead of using one hand to fret notes and the other to strum, Eddie treated the fretboard almost like a piano, using both hands to hammer out notes at blistering speed. The result, immortalized in Eruption, was something rock audiences had never heard before. Lightning-fast runs, eerie precision, and a completely new sonic vocabulary. It was so groundbreaking that, in the early days, his brother Alex reportedly told him to turn his back to the audience during solos so other guitarists couldn't figure out what he was doing. And if a guitar didn't give him the exact sound he wanted, Eddie didn't complain, he rebuilt it. He sawed, sanded, and rewired instruments until they matched the sound in his head. His most famous creation, the red, white, and black striped Frankenstein, often called the Frankenstrat, was assembled from a cheap body and neck he bought separately. That homemade experiment became one of the most iconic guitars in rock history, so legendary that a replica now sits in the Smithsonian. English wasn't his first language. Eddie Van Halen became one of the defining figures of American hard rock in the 1970s and 80s, shaping the sound of the genre alongside his older brother Alex in their band Van Halen. But long before he was a guitar icon, he was an immigrant kid trying to find his footing in a new country. Born in the Netherlands in the mid-1950s, Eddie and Alex moved with their parents to Pasadena, California when they were still in elementary school. The transition wasn't easy. Eddie arrived in the United States barely speaking English, and the language barrier made him an easy target. In a 1998 interview with Rolling Stone, he admitted that he was bullied and physically attacked because he was different. "I wasn't able to speak English and used to get my A out kicked because I was a minority," he said. He didn't become fluent in English until around age 7, but by then he had already learned how it felt to be an outsider. Eddie Van Halen didn't read music. Eddie Van Halen is widely regarded as one of the most gifted musicians ever to pick up a guitar or sit down at a piano. His technical skill, creativity, and instinctive feel for melody placed him in the category of true virtuoso. But unlike many of the classically trained legends who came before him, Van Halen built his entire career without ever truly learning to read music. Over more than 5 decades of writing, recording, producing, and performing, he relied almost entirely on his ear. He didn't compose by studying notation. He composed by feeling his way through the instrument. Even as a child, he won 3 consecutive piano competitions at Long Beach City College without being able to properly interpret the sheet music placed in front of him. He memorized the pieces by listening and playing them back. That approach carried over when he switched to guitar. He later admitted that he would fool the teacher by learning everything by ear. While he could recognize notes written on a page, he couldn't sight read in the traditional sense. And in his mind, that never mattered much. As he once explained, reading music is useful for learning what someone else has written. But his gift was creating something entirely his own. Eddie Van Halen's life was a story of brilliance and contradiction, unmatched talent shadowed by addiction, groundbreaking innovation paired with private pain, and a legacy that continues to echo long after his passing. From his early struggles to his final battle with cancer, the man behind the guitar was far more complex than the legend on stage. And now, with Valerie Bertinelli finally opening up after his death, the story feels more human than ever. What part of Eddie's journey surprised you the most? His musical genius, his personal battles, or the quiet strength of the people who stood beside him? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more deep dives into the tragic details, the untold truth, and the real stories behind icons like Eddie Van Halen, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more.